In this era of new technology, it's not really news to hear about a cold case being solved. But the case of one 97-year-old man, excuse me, whose recent death was ruled a murder is making even lawyers wonder how far back one can go to catch a killer. That and plenty more. Let's welcome back our legal expert from the law offices of O'Brien and Ryan LLP in Philadelphia, and one of millions hunkering down at home in the face of the winter storm right now, Heather Hansen. Heather, you haven't had anybody shovel out your walk yet, have you?
It's not even shovelable yet, Ed, but we're waiting for it. Looking out the window, waiting for it to come.
Oh, all that anticipation. All of a sudden, if Carly Simon had the song again, we'll go ahead and get it ready for you right there. Everybody's just waiting and hunkering down. All right, let's get down to the legal stuff here. This is a fascinating case. A 97-year-old man dies. And then it is determined that he died, that he was knifed 50 years ago, and that caused the death. How do you figure this one out? And then how do you get down to statute of limitations and figuring out who's there? This has got a movie written all over it.
It does have a movie written all over it, although the chances of them finding the killer are slim to none in this case. I mean, first of all, whether or not the killer is still alive would be questionable. Second of all, the gentleman at the time never filed a police report. So in order to go back and try to rebuild what happened here would be close to impossible. It's going to be, I think, an unsolved case for a long time to come.
Is this just a case where the detectives opened a murder investigation simply as a matter of cause? They need to do it, but when they do it, they know full well that this is never going to be solved.
It is, Ed. I mean, there are occasions where it used to be under common law that after a year and a day, if the victim of a crime had not died, it couldn't be called a murder. Since advances in technology have led people to live for longer, they have changed that law in most states. So when something is called a murder, they have no choice but to open an investigation. But it sort of makes sense that they investigate and then close the books on this one so there's not wasted resources in trying to find somebody this many years later.
Let's move on. The dorm sex assault case at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. I find this pretty insulting, actually, in so many ways, because the defense attorneys now for the football players, the former players, their cell phones showed they took part in a dorm room sex assault. The attorneys placing the blame on the university, saying their client's judgment was warped by a campus culture where drunken sex was common. Honestly, I can't think of anything more than just insulting on this to think that it was a culture that led these guys to rape this girl.
You know, they're blaming it on alcohol to a large part and saying that both of the defendants, and of course they have separate attorneys, but that both of the defendants weren't making good decisions, could not form the intent to commit this crime because they were so drunk. Listen, we know that the majority of all sexual assaults on campuses have something to do with alcohol consumption, and whether we talk about that when it comes to prevention is one thing, but when you're talking about a crime and you have the evidence that you have here, this attempt to somehow sway the jury by either making them somehow relate to these defendants or feel bad for these defendants, I think and hope will come back to haunt them and not work well for the defense here.
I do want to point out that they have not been convicted of anything. These are still allegations at this point because they are currently in trial. It is accusations of aggravated rape and aggravated battery. Heather, do you think that just from this case alone now, maybe the schools are going to get a little more serious about looking at that culture, though? Because while you can't hold the culture to blame for this, you still have to look at it as a contributing factor somewhere down the road.
You know, Ed, it's true. There's two different things. We're talking about blame, finding liability in a court of law, and I think that in that situation, this culture defense, it's almost like trying to use it as they used that affluenza defense some time ago for that young man. They're trying to do that. It just doesn't work. For prevention in the future, the culture definitely has to change, not just for the young men, but also for the young women. We have to change the culture all around so that both sides are taking better responsibility and this binge drinking is not leading to such dire consequences.
45 seconds. Why do civil rights leaders not want to see the Fair Housing Act of 1968 coming back into court?
Well, you know, it's been sort of avoided, and these types of cases have been settled 2 times. But now here in Texas, we have before the Supreme Court a question as to whether if some sort of housing system or policy has a disparate impact, is what it's called. If it impacts African Americans or those of minority status differently than it impacts Caucasians or those with the majority status, whether or not just on its face those types of locks can be illegal. And I am quite sure that the Supreme Court is going to find that if that is the case and it's just on their face with no intent, that that is not in fact illegal. And that means that it may lend itself to some housing decisions that will lead to a disparate impact on many, many minority groups.
More decisions as we go through the week again. Heather Hansen, thanks so much for joining us. And, oh yeah, by the way, enjoy your 2 days off.
Yeah, well, you enjoy the sun and the warm bed. I'll talk to you soon.
I knew you wouldn't feel bad for me. Thanks, Heather. Talk to you soon. The reaction to one major motion picture continues to shock. That's coming up next.